Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today is the day we're going to be installing our 408 stroker Windsor underneath the hood of our 93 F-150 single cab project that I'm kind of considering an OBS Ford Raptor build. Now it's a single cab short box, 4-wheel drive. It had a 351 underneath the hood and that's getting replaced obviously with a 408. I did spend a little bit of time just kind of cleaning up the cross member there. There was a ton of grease and grime and dirt on there, and I did paint it. It kind of looks a little bit out of place, but you know, when I wiped off all the grease, it was just kind of bare metal under there. So I really needed to put some kind of coating on the frame just to prevent rust. Because this is a like for like swap, this is the same exact engine from a outside dimensional standpoint. It's going to bolt right in, but I do have to swap over just a few odds and ends. You know, the oil pan that came on the blueprint engine, it was a front sump, and we have a rear sump in the F-150, so we got to swap the pan, the pickup tube, and there is one stud. I believe it's this one right here, the main stud, that I'm going to have to swap out because there's a little tab that holds the end of the oil pickup tube. On the dipstick, the blueprint engine came in the front timing cover there, if it will focus. That was where the dipstick was located before, but I drilled and tapped it for an 1/8 inch NPT plug. Mainly because number one, with the front or the rear sump pan, it would no longer work. And then number two, with the accessory drive going to be here, front dipstick just wasn't going to cut it. Now, I was thinking I was going to have to drill out the block, but this is actually just a freeze plug that was installed in there. Again, if we can focus, come on. There we go. So it was actually already drilled, so this will accept our driver's side dipstick, no problem at all. I don't have to drill through the block, so again, that is a nice thing there. So I had originally planned on using the old oil pan, but I just figured these are like 68 bucks or 75 bucks or something like that. Brand new oil pan, brand new pickup tube, so real simple there. Although I do have to, like I mentioned, pull the old pan off just to get that one stud out of there. And I think the rails that go along the oil pan, like those bolt reinforcement rails, I'll probably swap that over if it has it. I do have to pull the flex plate off. We have a new one, but I need the little spacer plate that goes behind the flex plate. And other than that, of course, we're going to be swapping over the accessory drive. But for today, all I really want to do is just get the bare bones on the new engine so I can actually drop it into the truck. Now, there have been quite a few questions on the comment section, which I'm really appreciative of. Any interaction in the comments is great for this channel. It helps everything grow, which, by the way, we are trying to reach 100,000 subs by the end of this year. So if you haven't already, click that like button, click the subscribe button, and drop a comment. That stuff all helps the channel grow. But anyhow, there are two major questions I wanted to address today before we get to work. The first is about EFI, and the second one is about the exhaust. So we are going with a Holley Super Sniper 4-barrel throttle body style EFI injection. They run great, they're controlled by a wideband, and they're self-learning, and they have pretty much the same software in them, the same logic, if you will, that the Holley Multiport stuff uses. But the question is, why didn't we go with a Multiport intake? Now, this was the owner's decision, and honestly, if it were me, I probably would have gone with like a Ford Lightning style tubular intake because they look cool, they have really long runners, which helps make really good torque. But, you know, for simplicity's sake, the owner decided he wanted to go with a 4-barrel style EFI. And honestly, they're a lot easier to install, they're a lot easier to plumb, so I'm happy to put it in either way. And I think honestly, at the end of the day, when you're driving this thing, I don't think you would really notice a huge difference. You know, we are running a dual plane intake also, so we still have some longer runners and good low RPM response. The second question is about exhaust, is why did we go with someone even said, why do we go with such a small exhaust? We've got a single 3-inch, dual 2.5-inch mid pipes with a Flowmaster Y. Okay, so the question, why do we go with only 3-inch? Because on paper, with close to 500 horsepower, a single 3-inch might not be quite enough. Well, let's kind of think about this for a second. First of all, the use of the vehicle. We're not going drag racing. We're not spending all day long at wide open throttle. You know, we're not building a race truck. We're building an off-roader that honestly is going to spend most of its time at a low to mid RPM, kind of going down a trail where the engine makes its peak horsepower at like 5,200 RPM. So would a larger exhaust benefit the engine? Possibly, or would maybe a dual setup been a little bit better? I'll give you that. Maybe it would have been from an all-out performance standpoint, but running out of breath here. When we built the exhaust, my main consideration and goal was ground clearance and fitment, because we knew in the future we were going to be installing a link suspension. I had no idea where all that stuff was going to be mounting from up front. We're putting some pretty big shocks on the back, and again, I just wanted something that would fit around all those future changes. So I think the ideal thing I wanted to do was like a single 3.5-inch exhaust, but it is really hard to find catalytic converters, mufflers, and mandrel bent tubing in 3.5, especially if it doesn't cost an arm and a leg. I think I found it in one place. And I think the 3.5 was like double the cost of a 3 and a little bit more than even a 4-inch setup. Now a 4-inch maybe would have been the way to go, but again, it's overkill for what we're really doing here, because we're not shooting for a drag racer. If we're chasing that last 1/10 of a second going down the quarter mile, might have gone with a bigger exhaust. But anyhow, for what we're doing for the application, that's kind of what you've got to consider, is how you're building the vehicle, what's the intended usage, and then you just size your parts accordingly. So anyway, if you guys do have any other questions about any of the builds that we do, feel free to drop a comment. I usually reply to a lot of them, or I'll just, do like I did now, address them in the video. So let's get to work. I'm gonna pull the oil pan off the old engine, grab those few last parts that I need. We'll get them on the new engine, and we'll put it in the truck. So it's the next morning, and I thought I had the engine pretty much ready to go back into the truck. That is until I actually started reading a couple comments on YouTube last night, which thankfully that's saving me a whole lot of work, but let me get to that in just a second. Needless to say, there is one major part that I need to change before the 408 goes into the F-150. So first though, let me just kind of recap all the stuff that we've done to get it up to this point. First of all, the old engine, I raised it up, pulled the pan, and I grabbed the stud from the middle main bearing that has the little, well, the stud point to mount the oil pump pickup tube onto. So I put the old pan back on, just kind of with a couple bolts. I also grabbed the pan rails and the hardware. I did get all that cleaned up because it's a little bit longer when I use those oil pan reinforcement rails or whatever. That's the spacer plate that goes between the bell housing and the flex plate. That'll get cleaned up as soon as I get the engine off the stand. Anytime you're working with a new oil pan and a new pickup tube, just check your clearance. You kind of saw me measure with a straight edge. I've got about 3/8 of an inch between the pickup tube and the bottom of the sump, so we're good to go there. These mounts here, these are pretty cool. These are from Bronco Graveyard, I believe. They use a urethane leaf spring bushing, so it's a much stronger design than the stock rubber ones, and the stock rubber ones is actually kind of broken. Although on these, I did have to oval the holes out just a little bit because the mount sat just a little too close to the block, so the bolts wouldn't fully attach. Also, you can kind of see this little, I welded right around here because when they built these, they welded the bolt in. It's actually not a through bolt because there's not quite enough space between the head of the bolt and the inside of the sleeve, so they welded it, you can kind of see there. But they didn't on this side because they had MIG welded it, but that's all right. I took the TIG and I just kind of fused that all together in there, painted them up. So motor mounts are good to go. I did leave this bolt just kind of semi-tight until I get the engine in so I can pivot those to where I need it, and then I'll fully tighten the hardware. Headers are on. I always like to put headers on first if you can get the engine in easily, just because of how difficult some of this stuff is to reach. I mean, like a couple of these bolts in here, I had to get the wrench from underneath, and that would have been a pain in the butt doing it in the chassis. On the other side here, the dipstick is in, although on the instructions they just suggest you take this little bracket here. Normally there's a little like fork on the end. They just kind of want you to bend it underneath that header bolt there. But it didn't really fit quite right, so instead I took this little bent piece of metal that actually came with a header kit. This was for, I think, for the plenum support on the other side. But anyway, I took this guy, I chopped the end off of the dipstick bracket there, welded the two together, painted everything up so the dipstick is mounted, it's not kinked, so the dipstick will pull in and out of the tube easily enough. So anyway, yeah, it's all put together, but then I was doing a little bit of reading on the comments, and someone actually, very helpful because this saved me a lot of hassle, pointed out that the timing cover is different between a standard rotation water pump application, which is what this is, and a reverse rotation like serpentine accessory drive like the mid-90s, F-150s and Broncos and other things like that use. So I did a little bit of looking. Luckily, O'Reilly's in town here had a new timing cover for the correct application. I went down and I picked one up, and at first glance I was like, wait a minute, is there even really a difference between the two? Because they do look very similar, but luckily that hole there and that hole there are, in the wrong spot, where this one, those holes are different, and this little section through here is kind of straight, versus this one, it kind of goes down and up. So I put the water pump on, we have a new water pump, and there would have been a coolant leak right from this area here because that hole is drilled through the timing cover. It kind of comes out back there. So that would have been a leak, and this one here would have been a leak as well. I don't know why Ford did this, had two different timing covers. I wish I would have caught this before I put the oil pan on, but I'm glad I caught it, or actually someone pointed it out before I got the engine in the truck and the water pump on, because that would have been so much more work to have to fix it. So anyway, all I've got to do now is I'm not gonna take the oil pan off, but I'm just gonna loosen it so I can drop it down a little bit because the front 4 bolts here do engage in the timing cover. Clean the gasket, swap the appropriate timing cover in, put the oil pump back on, and then we can get the engine in the truck. Alrighty guys, this is one of those classic good news and bad news situations. The good news is the new timing cover is in place, it'll bolt up to the new water pump and we won't have any coolant leaks and the engine is pretty much ready to go back into the truck. And the bad news is all progress is coming to a screeching halt right now because of one very important but also very wrong part. That's the flex plate. So along with all the stuff that I was provided for this build, we have this flex plate right here. Now, Blueprint Engines does recommend, or not recommend, it's critical that you run a non-counterweighted flex plate and harmonic balancer. A lot of the I think the 351s, the 302s, I think both of those are an externally balanced engine, which basically means there's a counterweight that bolts or is welded to either the balancer or the flex plate. We'll get to that in a minute. And because this is a stroker crank, they just internally balanced it. So in other words, there is no need for counterweight. On this particular balancer, this is a, if I can grab it, this is a bolt-in counterweight. So boom, we're good to go there. But the flex plate, that's another story. So it's actually the correct balance. This is an internally balanced flex plate, as you can kind of tell on the outside. There is no counterweight on it. So we should be good to go, right? Well, wrong. The bad news is this is actually for probably a smaller transmission like a C4. The flywheel diameter is much smaller, but also it doesn't have the appropriate spacing for the studs to bolt up to the E40D. If you were to, you can't really tell, but basically the hole for the stud will be almost right here on the edge. And it's not like I can just drill this out because the starter would no longer engage. And then also, it's not like I can use the original flex plate because number one, it has a counterweight spot welded on, and I suppose we could just cut that off. But I know these are kind of prone to cracking and we have a lot more horsepower than before. So we do want to go with an SFI certified flex plate. I just now need to find the right one and get it on the way. So that means the engine's not going in today as much as I wanted to. It's just one of those things. You got to have the right parts to make progress. So anyway, it's going to bring this video to an end. I want to say thank you guys for watching. Thank you for the support. I haven't plugged this in a little while, but we do have a merch line. It's at our website, tolmanperformance.com. One of my favorite shirts right here, the treadless trucking shirt. This is kind of appropriate because of all the burnouts that we like to do. So head on over there. We have hats, we have some shirts, and we're working on getting a few more designs. That's tolmanperformance.com. Also subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed today's content. I mean, if you didn't, I don't really need you to subscribe because I don't want you getting your subscription thing filled up with stuff you don't want to watch. But if you did enjoy it, help me out. Click that little red button, click the like button, drop a comment, all the YouTube stuff. That all helps this channel grow. And we are trying to reach 100,000 subs by the end of this year. And all that stuff just helps support the channel, helps buy speed parts for the ugly truck so we can make it faster and get closer to our goal of 1,000 horsepower for that one as well. Got a lot of goals this year, and I know we can make them happen. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you next time.